I know what the truth is, and I believe everything that happened in January 6th is going to be revealed. Every bit of it.
And I don't know exactly what you're referring to, so what would you say that is? What occurred on January 6th?
I'm talking about Nancy Pelosi, which she instigated, and the information she's got will be found on her laptop, and that will be, eventually, it will be revealed to the American people.
Watch as this fashion-forward Trump supporter gives his conspiracy theory about what actually happened on January 6th and ends up confusing himself in the process.
So Nancy Pelosi instigated January 6th?
I believe she did.
What would be the purpose of them coordinating this? What's the end game there?
The end game is to get Trump out so he doesn't win the presidency.
The actions of January 6th actually interfered with the certification, so doesn't it kind of not make sense that the Democrats would have instigated January 6th if that got in the way of the certification, which they wanted, because that was going to cause Biden to become president?
I don't know.
I'm Rayy Vana, and welcome back to Rebel HQ. I don't know seems to be the answer to a lot of questions posed to the MAGA crowd after they confidently share their nonsense, bumbling, rambling conspiracy theories, because they don't actually think that deeply about the things that they purport to believe. Critical thinking isn't exactly a value in the Republican Party. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. Remember when Donald Trump said he loved the uneducated?
We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated.
And it is from the brains of the poorly educated that come some of the most absurd January 6th conspiracy theories. Now, despite the fact that MAGA Republicans who were there that day posted about it all over their social media, testified in legal documents in courtrooms that they were there that day to support Donald Trump, and despite the fact that plenty members of the MAGA movement live streamed themselves literally storming the Capitol, these MAGA morons truly do believe that it wasn't actually Trump supporters there that day, that it was Antifa. Some of them believe it didn't even happen at all, and others, just like that man at the beginning of this video, think that it is some sort of deep state, Nancy Pelosi, Democrat-led conspiracy. Now, of course, we know the truth of what happened that day. Donald Trump inspired his rabid, violent supporters to attack the Capitol and threaten elected officials with death threats in order to overturn the democratically elected results of the 2020 election. We know that to be the truth. These people, however, seem to have a completely different version of reality in which they are living.
Well, on January 6th, I'd seen a lot of people voicing their opinion about how this country should be run. And I didn't see violence like they talked about. I watched violence for a whole year before that. Burned it down great cities in this country. Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, terrorizing great cities. Can you call New York the Big Apple anymore? That's what the world knew it as. Now it's a rotten apple. And it's because of the crime. It's because people are let run wild.
Now, this is one of my favorite arguments that right-wingers put forward as someone who lives in a major city, in Chicago, a city that supposedly was burned to the ground during the summer of 2020 when people were protesting in the streets for racial justice. The fact that I live here 4 years later and the city is very much still standing kind of flies in the face of what these right-wingers supposedly believe happened that summer. And they always attempt to compare the George Floyd protests to January 6th, despite the fact that the George Floyd protests were inspired by the violent police murder of George Floyd, which we saw captured on camera. It is a fact that he was murdered by the police, and it's also a fact that police are more likely to use violence, and that violence is more likely to be lethal when detaining Black people in this country. Racism in the institution of policing is not a theory or speculation. It is a fact, and people are righteously angry about it. On the flip side of that, you have January 6th, where a mob of violent right-wingers were protesting the fact that their candidate lost an election. He claims it wasn't violent, but protesters were carrying guns. There were bombs placed around Washington, D.C. People died that day. People were killed that day. All over a lie. But somehow, not only was that not violent, nobody deserved to go to jail for it, is his contention. Take a look.
What about January 6th, though? What about, pardoning those convicted felons?
I guarantee you most of them people didn't do anything to deserve what they had to go through. And if they're sitting in jail, which is illegal in this country, I believe, well, only because it's in Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, they can pull something like that off. You can't just lock somebody up for no reason. You got to have a reason. Insurrection, that was an insurrection. What was all the other riots and burning downs and stuff that was going on before that? What was all that? Nothing?
Well, unfortunately for this intellectual titan, the January 6 rioters who are in prison are not sitting in prison for no reason. They were charged with crimes, convicted of those crimes, and then sentenced to jail. Not one of them is a political prisoner. They were held accountable for their actions, and in fact, too few of the January 6 rioters were held accountable for their actions. Only a small fraction of the people who breached the Capitol that day were charged with anything, and an even smaller fraction of them spent time in prison. But the fact of the matter is, we're not going to change these lunatics' minds. These people who are so deeply indoctrinated into the Trump cult are probably not going to come around to our way of thinking, which incidentally is the truth. So instead of wasting time trying to convince these people that they're wrong, we should be highlighting how insane they are and encouraging people in this, a very important election year, to get off their butts, go to the polls, and ensure that people who think January 6th was just a peaceful protest aren't the ones deciding who the next president of the United States is.